Hi, welcome back to another episode on the Healthy Wisdom series with Dr. Jen Chen. Today, we're going to continue our conversation with the wisdom of culture, and we're going to take it from a tradition standpoint. Now, growing up, we were introduced to a lot of traditional celebrations, and many of them, I remember, involved family gatherings, worshiping ancestors, and most of all, eating together, like lots of eating. So it wasn't until I attended Chinese school on Saturdays that we started to learn about the meaning behind all these different traditions and all the different celebrations that we would do throughout the year. I mean, traditions are very important in our Asian culture. And I mean, rightfully so. I mean, since they've been around for about 5,000 years and more. So I got kind of curious about what these kind of customs represented, and I wanted to share with you what I've come to know. So the definition of tradition is the belief and behavior that's passed down within a group or a society with a special significance to the origins of the past. And I thought, wow, well, we have 5,000 years of history behind us. So clearly we've got a lot of traditions that are coming around. But these traditions are also, I think, what makes us unique as a culture. They bring meaning to our celebrations, right? And they also help us bond to those that we love. So I thought, this is how we establish like family connection, where we feel like a sense of comfort and belonging. In other words, tradition brings families together and it enables us to reconnect as a unit. So one of my favorite meals together as a family has always been having hot pot. Now, for those of you who've never had the chance to try it, I highly recommend it. And for those whose families feast like that, let's indulge our imagination and maybe even delight in the last holiday gathering that you've enjoyed hot pot together. So today's episode, I wanted to give you guys a little brief history of how hot pot came to be and why it's become such an important part of our tradition. And then also, I want to give you guys sort of like an outline of a protocol of how hot pot is sort of eaten today or enjoyed by many in the modern day, so that, it gives you kind of like a starting point if you're, interested in exploring this as a form of family gathering and sharing a meal together. So let's start by sort of describing what is hot pot. Picture this. You have a big, what we call steaming pot, or actually fire pot. In Chinese, the characters are fire, which is huo, and then pot is guo. So huo guo is hot pot. Now in Cantonese, it's fo wo. So same Chinese characters, they're just pronounced a little bit differently. And so hot pot is where we usually will have sort of like the steaming pot in the center stage. And most family members and friends will gather around in a round table, which is most traditional and actually easier for every single person who's sitting in the round table, that they can actually reach the pot evenly, in terms of distance. So this is like the way we generally eat hot pot. We would have a pot in the middle and people would sit right around a round table. And also we would have different styles of dishes that are spread around the table so that there's like, it's almost like a feast. Like we have all sorts of ingredients on different dishes. And this steaming hot pot will generally come with a broth or a soup base. And so what each person does is they pick whatever, dish that they would like to start cooking, and they would participate in what we call sort of active eating, right? So diners will generally take a piece of, a sliced meat or a piece of vegetable, and they would pop it in the pot via, in the modern day, we use these types of big holes that resembles those strainers, so that the ingredient that you put in doesn't get lost in the broth as it's boiling and sort of traveling around the pot. So that's sort of how we modern day people eat that. But back in the day, everything was just kind of like popped into the broth, and then people would just enjoy the ingredients together as they are being cooked to perfection. So this is how we as a family generally, or a typical Chinese family, would enjoy a meal together. It's kind of neat, actually. And so the steaming hot pot is brought to like a boil, and it's piping hot, right? Providing like the sense of warmth, and just having everybody gather around the table brings a lot of love into the surroundings. And so hot pot is generally enjoyed the most in the wintertime, because the juxtaposition of the cold winter night with the warmth of the hot pot that, people enjoy at home is just such a nice feeling. And again, it brings a sense of comfort and loving sort of feeling. So let me kind of dive into a little bit of history. I mean, like for those of us who've had hot pot pretty much all our lives, I don't know how many of us would have actually given it much thought as to where the origins of this tradition came about. Well, it turns out that it actually is believed to date back to about the Jin dynasty, which is more than like 1,000 years ago. And hot pot was thought to actually have originated, back in the Mongolia times. So legend has it that Mongols who used to ride up north, they used their helmets to simmer the broth over an open fire, and that they would actually cook chunks of meat within the broth. And that's how they would enjoy like a nice piping hot meal in the cold winters. So that was kind of neat. I thought to myself, wow, actually the Mongols were kind of smart, because they are very compact in the way they packed, right? They were very smart as a nation. They would be very clever to only pack what's necessary. And so this is one way that they would be able to enjoy a meal without having to have extra things to carry. So I thought that was really neat. So here's the thing. Chinese people resisted Mongolians back in the day quite a bit. I mean, seriously, the Great Wall of China was built so that they could actually stop the Mongols from invading, China, right? So despite, the splendor of the Great Wall of China, culturally speaking, the Chinese took actually this hot pot concept from the Mongols, and they've incorporated it into their style of eating. And it's been modified over the years to now what we would have as the present day hot pot feast that we would enjoy in family gatherings. So it's interesting to see that, how it originated and it transferred into our own dining table. And hot pot is really not just a culinary experience, but it's also an almost like an exercise in social connectivity, because we love having lots of people to enjoy the meal together. So the more the merrier is usually what we say. And it's also a way in which people will share the meal together. I mean, the way you could think about it is um, in a figurative way and a visual way. We could see that, the willingness to eat from the same pot and also share the same lot is sort of what it represents when we're having hot pot together. It represents a unit coming together. I mean, it's a beautiful way to share a meal. And so you would never enjoy hot pot with people you don't like, right? So really, really neat. But what I wanted to also be able to kind of describe for you is, I would say kind of like a protocol to enjoy a really good hot pot experience, especially if you've never had that hot pot as a meal. This is one way you could try to at least familiarize yourself before you head into a hot pot restaurant, or even if you wanted to attempt to make one at home, because the concept is very basic, right? I mean, if the Mongols could use their helmet as a pot, right? You could literally, make it a feast at home with just whatever you already have. So the the number one thing that you do have to have is good broth, right? The soup base is so important. So if you were to make it at home, I would suggest, just go simple and do one type of broth, and, there are so many different recipes online that you could probably look up, but generally at home, we would go with like a pork bone broth, and we would throw in some goji berries, and some carrots and onions and a little bit of ginger, just to like, sort of like set like a nice little brothy base. And this is like a very, very simple broth. And, if you happen to like some spicy, you can always throw in some chili peppers, and then that'll spice things up. But here's the thing, with our modern day convenience, you could literally go to any of those Asian markets, and they will have pre-packaged hot pot soup bases that you can purchase as well. And there's like a plethora of different types of flavors that you could get. So, I mean, literally, you don't even have to boil the broth for 7 or 8 hours in order to make your own. You could literally buy those broths, add some water, and that forms a delicious soup base. So at a restaurant, however, I would highly recommend that you get what we call a yin yang pot, right? Which is a yuan yang pot in Mandarin. And in Cantonese, it's called yun yang. And the yin and yang, or yin yang, what it represents is, you can actually have a more lighter or clearer broth, which is generally like a soup that's got like more of a bone broth as a base. And then you can have a more flavorful or even spicy broth on the other end, so that, you can have different types of flavors, that dance on your tongues, as you're enjoying the different ingredients. Personally, I love cooking my meats in a spicy broth, and I love my vegetables and mushrooms and tofu and the lighter stuff on the other clearer broth, just because that's just my own preference. But, sometimes mixing it up so that, you don't get super spicy on one side, that's also great. And so that's what I would recommend, definitely having a split pot where you have two types of soup base. And the second thing you would do is you would generally select dishes either from a menu or from a refrigerating sort of display that they will have at hot pot places, of the different qualities and types of sliced meat, chopped vegetables, dumplings, seafood, tofu, and different types of noodles that you can also incorporate into your hot pot soup or concoction. And sometimes they come in skewers, and sometimes they come on like, dishes displayed beautifully, so that it's extra appetizing. I mean, it's beautiful to look at, and it's also delicious to eat. I absolutely love hot pot. And the third thing is, I mean, this is the fun part. You get to create your own dipping sauce. I mean, that is like one of my favorite things to do, because when you're at a restaurant, what they do is they push over a little cart, and then they have like 15 or 20 different types of either sliced, chopped, grated, different types of ingredients. And those ingredients can range anywhere from soy sauce, sesame oil, sesame sauces, peanut sauces, vinegar, chili bits, cilantro, green onions, ginger, garlic, you name it. honestly, they've got it. So you can make your own concoction, little mixes of whatever you like in your dipping sauce. Now, there is a function to the dipping sauce. So the types of ingredients that I described are more for the complementing of the flavors.